Mhm.
Welcome to this session with the Venerable Tenzin Gache on disintegratedness as a functioning thing. The Lama Tsongkhapa Institute expresses a heartfelt thanks to Venerable Gache for accepting our invitation to be our speaker today. This presentation is part of our free Master Program Talks series, which aims to explore Buddhist teachings in depth while providing glimpses into the FPMT Master's Program curriculum. Venerable Tenzin Gache was ordained in Dharamsala by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and has been studying at Sarajay Monastery in southern India ever since. He is currently entering the 17th year of the standard 90-year Gache study program. He has translated several important teachings by his teacher Kyabje Choden Rinpoche, including works on calm abiding and Mahamudra, Guru Yoga, and Bodhisattva and Tantric vows. After the presentation, if time allows, we will open up to questions from the Master's Program students in the room and then to the Zoom. Thank you once again, Venerable Gache.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for having me here. I've enjoyed doing these talks. Gives me a chance to really go in depth into what we are or have been studying in a way that I don't get to do in ordinary teachings. So I'm very happy that you're all also studying this, that you have some ability to understand what we're talking about. I think if I gave this kind of talk in an ordinary setting of Dharma practitioners, then I think most people would not have the language and the background to really understand what we're talking about here. But it's very nice that you're all studying in the way that allows this. So we've done some talks on Madhyamaka. This is the third one. And so the first talk on Madhyamaka, if you were there, was about the objective negation, which is a very, in some sense, technical, in that sense that it's getting right to the point of what is the emptiness that's going to be then discussed in the terms of the other topics. Now, in the second talk, we talked about the how do we say commonly appearing subjects, which is considered one of the eight. The Tsongkhapa talked about the 8 difficult points of Madhyamaka, where it said that if you understand the Madhyamaka, the or Sangika negation of inherent existence, then these 8 points, which are very difficult philosophical points that all of the Buddhist schools struggled with, they all have fall into place. The answer becomes self-evident once we understand Chandrakirti's negation of inherent existence. So the first one of those was the negation of the what we say Rangyu, which means it's really literally Sivatantra in Sanskrit. So some of you might know Sivatantrika school, which means means a syllogism that is established from its own side, not depending upon a particular way of conceptualizing it. And so that is, as we saw, was a quite difficult subject. But within that, I feel personally that I have some idea of how to present that. I was able to say it in a way that I felt satisfied that at least I was able to communicate the words. Now, this next topic is also very difficult, and it's not one that I feel actually as confident that I feel I've resolved all of the issues personally. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes of this talk. But at the same time, I find it extremely interesting in as much as this particular topic, so this is disintegratedness as a functioning thing, it is very relevant to understanding how karma functions. That's really the main point here. And so that is the heart of Buddhist philosophy in general, is trying to pinpoint, we talk about karma, how do we understand that conceptually in a way that we can gain some kind of conviction in it, that it's not just some kind of idea that we can't kind of integrate with our worldview. Now, nowadays, a lot of us, our worldview is very much influenced by scientific findings, which is excellent. But it also, for at least some people, that makes it very hard to think about how can karma be possible, because it doesn't seem to fit. And so this particular topic gives us the tool about how to actually conceptualize that in a way that's much stronger, I feel, than especially the Vaibhashika presentation, which we'll talk about a bit in the background, and then even more so than the Chittamatra, which is much more advanced and more compatible with modern science, but still the Prasangika one is quite in a league of its own, I think, in terms of its profundity, the way that Chandrakirti made this explanation. So just also to give a little bit of background about this topic. So we say disintegratedness is a functioning thing. So that is also one of these 8 difficult points that Tsongkhapa talked about, is that disintegratedness can be a functioning thing. So the word disintegratedness, first of all, it's very heavy, as we see, disintegratedness. How many? It's like 6 syllables, maybe. In Tibetan, it's just jikpa. It's very simple. So I thought about whether there's a better way to translate it, but I don't think there is. So Thupten Jinpa, he had used disintegration in his translation of illuminating the intent. And so I wondered maybe I should try that, but I thought about it. The problem with that is the word there's the word in Tibetan. If any of you know about the Tibetan language, you have the word jikpa, which means disintegration. And so that's something that all of the schools accept, that a pot, for example, has its disintegration, moment-to-moment disintegration. The word jikpa is the past tense of that. So it has disintegrated. But it's the state of having disintegrated. It's not a verb in this context. It's used as a noun, the state of having disintegrated. So in English, I think the word ness, then you add that, it makes it a noun, disintegrated in the disintegratedness, the state of having disintegrated. So that's an important point that if we translate it a different way, it might get lost. So the point is that the other schools all accept that that disintegration is a functioning thing. The pot changes moment to moment, but once it's gone, it's just gone. It's permanent. It's being passed is now a permanent thing. It doesn't change moment to moment anymore because there's nothing to change. It's all gone. But here, the disintegratedness is still changing moment to moment. So the past is still a functioning thing. Now, as we'll see, the Vaibhashika school actually asserts this as well. So saying disintegratedness is a functioning thing is not unique to Prasangika. The Vaibhashika also assert this, but they assert it in a very different way that's ultimately quite incoherent when we try to discuss it in philosophy. And it's also, we have the Vaibhashika understanding of karma that we will get into, which is related to their understanding of the past as functioning. But again, it ultimately becomes incoherent because it's just sort of ad hoc, as we'll see. It's like saying, well, because karma functions, then therefore the past is a functioning thing. But then they actually explain how that works. It becomes philosophically untenable. So all of the other schools of thought in India, the Buddhist schools, they rejected that, and they posited much more sort of meaningful or approachable ways of understanding karma, mainly in terms of there's some kind of repository within somewhere in the being's continuum that holds seeds that then travel through time, and those seeds carry the imprints of things that happened in the past, even though the past is gone. And then those seeds ripen. But Chandrakirti rejected that. He said that if you think that way, that is ultimately another way of resurrecting the Hindu idea of an Atman, as some kind of self that is traveling through time. So he resurrected himself, he resurrected the Vaibhashika view, which everyone had rejected, but he explained it. It's not that he literally accepted their viewpoint, but a lot of the terminology is similar. But he was able to explain it in a way that, as we'll see, I think makes a lot more sense. Now, as for how this came about, this idea, so actually, if we look in Chandrakirti's work, there's never an explicit statement disintegratedness is a functioning thing. This is actually Tsongkhapa's extrapolation, we could say. His understanding of what was Chandrakirti saying and how do we say it in debate language. So some of you might know the life story of Tsongkhapa. It said that when he was 41, when he was staying in retreat, a vision of the Indian masters, and then he had a direct realization of emptiness. This is understood in his biography as being completing analysis of the view, they call it. So if any of you know the text, the three principal aspects of the path, towards the end of that, it says, when dependent arising appears to you complementary to emptiness, then you have completed analysis of the view. That's what he's talking about. But it said that it wasn't until about 10 years later that he completed analysis of the texts, meaning that he understood not just the fundamental Madhyamaka view, but he understood how Nagarjuna had applied that to all the different bases of emptiness, which in the text Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, then it has 27 chapters, and each one goes through different applications of the understanding of emptiness. So the way that this came about, it said that when Tsongkhapa was staying at Serachuding, which is a hermitage, which is close to where Sera Monastery was later built. He was staying there, and he was trying to understand Nagarjuna's work, so he prayed to Manjushri, and then he had a vision of the writing of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the verses, the section on that sutra on the 20 kinds of emptiness. It appeared to him in gold letters in the sky above the place where Sera Monastery was later built, and then those letters descended. So this is later he asked them to build the monastery there. And it said that when he had that experience, then he understood fully what Nagarjuna was saying, and was able to then compose two texts at that point, Essence of Eloquence and Ocean of Reasoning. So you'll see, if you read Essence of Eloquence, he says twice in that text that there's an understanding of disintegratedness as a functioning thing that's very profound, and I'll explain it in a later text I intend to write as a commentary on the wisdom. So that next text he wrote was the Ocean of Reasoning. And in chapter 19, which is the discussion of time, then he goes through this talk about disintegratedness as a functioning thing. And then he brings it up again later in his Illuminating the Intent, which he wrote again 10 years later, his discussion of Chandrakirti's work. So in some sense, this was his innovation, but he understood it as implicit in the talk of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. It just wasn't, in order for us to understand it, the way of course the tradition understands is that people were more intelligent when they read Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, so they didn't need somebody to put it in this language. But in the times like these, when those of us have less intelligence, then it needs to be explained more explicitly. So whatever the case may be, his understanding of this was unique in Tibet. It is not accepted by the other Tibetan schools, especially the Sakya. Some of you might know the famous Sakya scholar Gorampa. This was one of the points that he attacked within Tsongkhapa's work, and said that this disintegratedness is a functioning thing. This doesn't make any sense. So we can see for ourselves and decide. I haven't read Gorampa in any detail, maybe someday. But for me, anyway, as I've said, I find this topic, although it's very hard, also we'll see that there's quite a few debate points that I'm just going to leave out there because I don't necessarily have an answer. But it does give a good basis for trying to understand conceptually how karma might function. So again, just couple other things to say before we start the screen share. So also in terms of the nature of time, as I brought up, so I think the two key points here that are related to how to understand karma, that Chandrakirti turns them on their head. Our normal understanding is the understanding of time and the understanding of memory. Memory won't get into as much because there's a separate topic. That will be the next topic, hopefully, in this series, is talking about the negation of self-cognition, which has a lot to do with how memory functions. But it's related here, and we'll see how that comes in. So in terms of the understanding of time, nowadays, of course, except for our ordinary way of talking about it, which is considered relevant here in Madhyamaka philosophy, but is probably not that different now than it was in the past. But we also, if we think about it in terms of philosophy, then most of us would have recourse to science and maybe to relativity and so forth, understanding time. I think that's quite compatible with what we're talking about here, but it's a very different angle of understanding. It's a third-person perspective, whereas here we're talking about the experience of time, because this is something that maybe in science is not addressed, right? So we can address in science how to measure time and the way that time is could it be a dimension, a fourth dimension within the space-time? But then what about a question like, does the past exist? If not, where did it go? And why am I now? Why is now where I am and not where somebody else was in the past time? Right? Those are questions that science doesn't quite address because most, maybe at least in terms of scientific method, it's sort of irrelevant. It has to do with our own experience, asking why, unless there's a way we could measure it and make it falsifiable. But what does it mean to say the past exists or doesn't exist? But that here in this context, it's quite relevant. And it is relevant in terms of memory, which personally I feel is another thing that is not very well understood in most scientific investigation, what memory actually is or how it is stored here. But in Chandrakirti's presentation, it appears to be that it has to do also with the nature of time. When we access the past through memory, it creates a link with the past to now that maybe in some sense it's opening up a link that was already there. But the point is that we'll see when we reflect on when the past affects how we behave now, and in that sense, the past is still present here now. There are perhaps more profound ways to understand that, but as we go through this, we'll see how that is understood here. And I think also these are very abstract ideas. So the big question is, how do we talk about this in a more precise way? And that's what gets very difficult. And that's why all these debates arise, is how do we actually, okay, if the past still exists somehow and is still affecting us now, then how can we talk about it in a way that, again, we could say falsifiable, that we say, well, it follows this or that if that's the case. And that is going to be addressed here. Okay, so I'll start now with the screen share. See, it's all in Hindi here. I apologize for using somebody's computer. I'll need to have the full screen. I'll need your help with that. Okay, so how do I do full screen view or reading view or slideshow? You can get to this.
Oh, this is LibreOffice.
Oh, it's not. It's not
PowerPoint.
Not PowerPoint. You don't have PowerPoint on your computer.
No, it's a Libre.
Okay, can I just view it full screen somehow?
Yeah, I thought you could, but I'm not seeing the option.
If we go to Zoom, maybe that helps. Yeah. No, that doesn't work. Okay, I apologize, everyone. We'll get that
probably open
running in a moment. Yeah, last time I used your computer, it worked. But...
Oh, yeah, it should be in here somewhere.
Yeah. What's this say?
Someone, it's not right. It's not right either.
Yeah. Here we go. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that works. I just guessed, but it was the right guess. Okay. So disintegratedness is a functioning thing. You see, escaping the mind trap of karmic cause and effect. The point being that the previous Buddhist scholars, they had to put themselves in this kind of trap by trying to understand karma, and then they ran into all of these philosophical problems. So we see here, this is meant to be a link of the past and the present. That's what's how Chandrakirti ultimately escapes from this trap. Okay, so just a couple of quotations about time that I thought were interesting to reflect on. Again, and as I said, here we're talking about the experience of time. So we see here Saint Augustine saying something 2,000 years ago. That's again very much how we might think about it now. It says, "What then is time?"
Again, gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. So on the, it's not showing up as full screen. On
Okay, it's not showing up on yours.
So again, actually, it's looked up.
It's-
So for LibreOffice, we do Shift F5, that ship it into full screen.
Okay.
And maybe you can exit.
How do I
first.
do? I can't read here.
Sorry, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Let me get
okay.
to put the zoom back to regular.
Yes. So if you do Shift
Shift F5.
Shift F5, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
now
I think that should.
is it on your screen that way?
Oh, it seems it's still not coming up. That's full screen here.
Okay, well, we don't have to do full screen. I mean, it's unfortunate, but at least they can still see it. That's the main thing, right?
Oh yeah, I think maybe Google Drive would be able to work.
Yeah. Okay, how do I get out of this now?
Wait, just
Okay,
escape. Yeah.
Okay, well, you can all see the slide anyway. So I
Not-
think
not now.
No, you can't see anything.
No, but Davide is saying that it's only F5.
Is screen share on?
We can't.
The screen's share on.
Yeah, I think if you click here,
Yeah.
then yeah. Oh, okay. I think that might be the reason. So now if you do Shift F5, now it might work.
Davide is saying only F5.
Oh, oh, it's still not working.
Huh.
Yeah, you should.
Okay, very sorry for that.
Just turn this off.
Yeah. Mhm.
Can you see like which screen you're sharing over here? Like if you click the down arrow. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
not switching to the full screen.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try it one more time.
Oh, is it possible if you do full
What?
screen first and then do screen share? I'm not sure if I've ever done it that way. But
I don't know if I do
You
full
have to
screen, I
click-
can't get out of it. Right?
Yeah.
So I can't go on screen share. So okay, do you all see what the slides now on yours?
I want to close that. I mean,
Yes.
yeah,
So but it's showing it's showing this outline. So it's not showing the full slide. Anyway, you can see that, yeah?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's reasonable. That's better than nothing. So let's just do like this. Okay. So it says, what then is time? It says, I know well enough what it is, provided that nobody asks me. But if I am asked what it is and try to explain, I am baffled. Right? So this is how we generally experience things, that we talk about time. We can talk about past and future. There's interesting studies that have been done about the way people conceptualize time. We talk about the future, we think about it as ahead of us. We talk about the past, it's behind us. We indicate that way. In what way do we mean that? And it's shown that not all cultures think about it that way. But then we try to actually explain what it is. What is time? That's when we get into problems. Now here in modern physics, of course, they've come up with some quite innovative ways of understanding time that become also, again, measurable and falsifiable, which is standard for something that has to be a scientific theory. But we see even here, this is a recent physicist talking about this. He says, the status of time in physics today is quite unclear. Some physicists maintain that time doesn't exist, others that time is the only dimension that actually exists, while yet others maintain that time exists but isn't fundamental. So he goes on, once the objective existence of irreducible linear time is called into question, all bets are off regarding the existential status of personal agency after death. For this very after may be a relative or even illusory notion. This is very relevant here in our discussion. because when we talk about something, somebody is alive, somebody has died after death. Well, where is it after death? Only in the perspective of particular people experiencing it from that perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean there's something inherently from the side of time that is just passing in and of itself, regardless, sort of unrelated to any particular person's vantage point. So he goes on to say, it is conceivable that under certain understandings of the nature of time, if something once existed, then there is an important sense in which it cannot cease to exist. This is also quite relevant here in our saying that the past is a functioning thing. The past exists and affects the present. Now, for those of you who are interested in physics and can explain it more coherently than I can, might be interested to go into this and think about how this relates to the scientific understanding of time. And I'll show one slide later also that gives a few more points on that. But here we're going to talk just about how do we talk about this in a philosophical way that's beyond just throwing out ideas, that actually becomes more precise. So we have the outline here is the contextual background. I talked a little bit about that, but we'll go over it again. And then disintegrate as a functioning thing. So first, Tsongkhapa's how he backs up his assertion that this was the meaning of the Madhyamaka text. So proof from scripture is mainly the Madhyamaka text, and also reasoning. How can we understand this in relation to their philosophy? And then karmic imprints versus karmic disintegratedness. It's important to make that distinction. It's actually not self-evident, even in Tsongkhapa's work. He never explicitly says, in this system, they accept disintegratedness instead of imprints. However, we'll see that tends to be the generally accepted position within the monasteries of trying to understand how he meant this. And then defining the past and future, and then the substantial continuum of disintegratedness. So if disintegratedness is itself a functioning thing traveling through time, what is its own continuum? And then an implicative negation or an affirming negation, right? So this is also, Tsongkhapa says that this is not a non-affirming negation. It implies something else, which is different than the other schools. All the other schools accept that disintegratedness, something having disintegrated, does not imply something else. It's a non-affirming negation, and therefore it has to be a permanent thing. And then death and disintegratedness. So it would appear that here the understanding is that the death of the person is the disintegratedness of the person. And how is that relevant in terms of our discussion? And then disintegratedness versus abandonment. So we might know the term abandonment, that when we abandon afflictions, versus what does it mean that the afflictions disintegrate? And then tying it all back to non-inherent existence. So again, how is this ultimately understood in terms of non-inherent existence? Okay, so the various schools of Buddhist philosophy arose largely as a response to the question of how karma can function without a substantial self to carry it from life to life. So within the Buddha's lifetime, as is generally well known, that he did not make a lot of philosophical assertions. He did not try to build a philosophy per se. He just responded to questions that were not always in any kind of order. But later people tried to put this together, because if we're going to accept this as our philosophy, as our religion, we have to have some basis for that, other than just seeing as this person seems so extraordinary and therefore I want to follow his teachings. We have to have some way to equate this with our own background. And that became more relevant in India as India became a more sophisticated society, and people wouldn't just accept things without reflecting against what they had already learned. And then these differences of opinion, moreover, essentially hinge upon this question. So the different philosophical schools, really it comes down to their understanding of karma. So I think when we talk about emptiness especially, it's good to understand what was the context of this discussion of emptiness. I think to say that emptiness is unrelated to karma seems to be taking it out of the contextual background of where it arose. Really, Nagarjuna was trying to explain the Buddha's teachings, and especially the teachings on karma, in a way that was innovative compared to the way that the other previous schools had been trying to conceptualize this, and then putting themselves into these intellectual traps. So how do they understand it? So the Vaibhashika have their own proposed solutions to how can there be, because the problem that some of the Vedic scholars, we could say, they weren't called Hindu at the time, were posing to the Buddhists is that you can claim that there's karma, but then there's no self that goes from life to life. So where is it carried? How does that make any sense? So the Vaibhashikas proposed some solutions. So one of the schools, the Vasuputriyas, who are the ones who actually asserted a substantial person, they said there is a substantial self, just not a permanent, unitary, independent one. And that self carries the karma. But that, again, becomes almost as if they're giving up the fundamental thesis of the Buddhist worldview, and they want to have it both ways. When they ask, they would say, there is a self, but it can't be called either permanent or impermanent. It can't be called either substantial or imputed. But then it's almost like, well, what is it? It's something beyond anything we can understand. Then why should we accept it? So the other Vaibhashika schools had a different understanding, and most of them posited that physical karma is form. So when I make a physical action, then that is a physical thing. There's a physical karma that is carried with me. And we can see it can either be revealing form, which is a light-like substance that abides together with the coarse body when a person performs an action. So there's almost like a superimposed actor that's going through the motions of doing something, in addition to the physical body that is the result of previous karma. And that is revealing in the sense that other people can see it and can judge from my actions what is my intention. Whereas if the motivation is very strong for an action, or the object of the action is powerful, for example, one is acting toward a stupa or a Buddha, then a non-revealing form will also arise and continue to accumulate virtue or non-virtue over a long period of time. So the classic example of this is when someone takes vows, and takes monastic vows, for example. Then the motivation is strong and the object is powerful. It creates a non-revealing form that is a physical thing that is carried with that person and continues to be virtuous over a long period of time. I won't get too much into this. We discussed this quite a lot this year in our discussion of Abhidharma. It's actually quite a bit more coherent than it might sound at first. It seems like they were trying to, again, describe something that intuitively makes sense, and then try to frame it within a philosophical standpoint. And they ran into some problems, but we think about it. If there is such a thing as physical karma, when I create a physical action, then why should that imprint not also be physical? Why should it have to be a mental thing? But we'll see that the other schools reject that. And then again, Chandrakirti resurrects this. In the Prasangika school, physical karma is physical. So in any case, in both cases, revealing or non-revealing form, the form will be accompanied by an obtainment. This is even more abstract. It's a non-associated compositional factor that is similarly virtuous and non-virtuous. The analogy they used, or the metaphor they used to understand obtainment, is a pack animal. So like a donkey that's carrying a pack. And the obtainment is like the ropes that secure the pack to the donkey. So likewise, you have the obtainment which secures that form to the sentient being. This is something that the Chandrakirti does not resurrect. I think the other schools, for good reason, discarded this idea. It really just seems like they're just adding on something as a way of trying to explain it, but it doesn't. It's hard to see how this could make a lot of sense, and it gets into all kinds of problems. So this, in our debate exam actually this year, a lot of people like to debate about this because it runs into all kinds of kind of self-contradictions. But they had to explain something in order to explain how karma stays with the person, and how because even when the person isn't fully aware of what they're doing, there has to be something that is maintaining it. So this obtainment will remain until the karma ripens, unless something counters it. So other Vaibhashikas also posit non-wastage rather than obtainment. So it's similar, except that non-wastage is static but not eternal. So this means when they talk about impermanence, it's impermanent in that it doesn't last forever, but it doesn't change moment to moment. So that actually we didn't discuss, because this is not the position of the Kashmiri Vaibhashikas, who is the Abhidhamma Kosha that we study is based on that. And they reject this idea of non-wastage specifically for this reason, that it's static. They say that if it's a functioning thing, or if it's carrying the imprints of karma, it also has to be a compounded thing, and therefore it has to change moment to moment. But I'm just mentioning that because you might encounter that, and also you'll see that these schools came up with all kinds of different ways to try to understand this fundamental point. Okay, so next we have other schools like Chittamatra reject karma as form because they do not see how form can leave an imprint that will ripen in the future. For example, when I die, if I go to the next life, nothing physical is coming with me. So how can there be a physical thing that is karma? And they also reject as ad hoc obtainment. They say that obtainment is just something that they added on because they had to have something to explain it, and it's metaphysically awkward. For as I mentioned it. For example, you have to then posit the obtainment of the obtainment, and they say yes. They say there's infinite numbers of obtainment, but then it becomes, if they're all substantially existent, then you have to be able to find them and point to them. But obviously, if there's infinite numbers, it would be very difficult to point to all of them. Okay, so then the Chittamatra also say, instead of obtainment and physical karma, they posit a mind basis of all that carries various imprints. So whether an action is virtuous or non-virtuous, the imprint is neutral. This is an important point, and remains dormant until it ripens as a result. So I do an action in the past, that's a negative action or positive action, but then the next moment it posits an imprint on my consciousness. And you see this picture of the iceberg here. This is similar to their idea of the all-ground consciousness, this subtle consciousness that's functioning under the surface, that's much vaster than our ordinary waking consciousness, and it carries all of these imprints. But they're just dormant. They're not in and of themselves positive or negative. It's only when they ripen, and then one has the experience that's similar to the cause that was created sometime in the past. So the Madhyamakas reject a real self carrying imprints. So they reject both of these schools, but especially in terms of the Chittamatra understanding, they say that, again, this alaya vijnana, this all-ground consciousness, is like a real self. It's like the Atman again. And if there are imprints, then they have to have some kind of substantial ground that we can locate them on. But then that substantial thing has to be thereby inherently existent. The Prasangika especially said that anything, if it's substantial, meaning that it can appear to mind without having to rely upon something else to appear to mind, then it would be inherently existent, and that is philosophically untenable. Nothing is that way, so everything is imputed. So we have just a couple quotations here from the Madhyamaka text. So Nagarjuna says in chapter 17 of Root Wisdom, if it abides until it's ripe, then karma will be permanent. But if it ceases, how can what has ceased still generate results? Now, actually, he's not presenting his own view in that verse, but he's presenting the view that a lot of Buddhist schools, the problems that they saw with this idea of karma, that if karma is something that stays until when I create the action up until when I experience the result, then it's a permanent thing. But if it ceases, then how does it generate any result? So the other schools, that's how they end up positing all of these extra entities. That's something that carries the result. But Chandrakirti, as we see in Supplement to the Middle Way, he has a different solution. He says, because it doesn't cease inherently, it's potent, even with no basis of all. So he's rejecting the Chittamatra view. So the karma, it ceases only in the perspective of a particular person. The past is only the past from the perspective of a person who's existing at a different time. But it's potent. It has its own potency, just like everything else. It has the potential to bring a result. So for some, since karma stopped, a long time too has passed, yet no, the right result will come. So even though a long time from our perspective has occurred, we travel through time, nevertheless, the right result is waiting to ripen. So how does that happen? Okay, so Tsongkhapa, based on this verse of Chandrakirti, he comes up with this idea that the past is a functioning thing, the present is affected by the past, which, being the past, exists as a potency in the present. So the disintegratedness is the past that exists in the present. Disintegratedness is a functioning thing, and conventionally the action gives its ripened result. So conventionally, we can talk about it this way. We can say that I created this action and I have this result. But if we try to analyze that within our framework, then it doesn't work because it's only a convention. It's the way that we experience reality is not the way that it actually is from its own side. So if we try to discover from its own side how this is happening, it can't be discovered. So also he says, disintegratedness needn't be a non-affirming negation. To be a functioning thing, it needn't be findable under analysis. So the other schools reject that disintegratedness could possibly affirm something else because the basis of disintegratedness, the basis of labeling it, is an imputed thing. They all agree that it's imputed, but it is imputed upon a non-affirming negation, which is the non-existence of something. From their perspective, the other schools, then they would say that if something is imputed, there has to be at least a substantial thing upon which it's imputed that you can point to. Otherwise, you can't. There's no basis for imputation. And ultimately, you have to be able to, when you search for it, you have to find something that's some basis of what you're talking about. It can't just be a purely conceptual idea. Otherwise, it's just an idea, and it's not something that functions in the world. But for Madhyamaka, that's not a problem because everything is like that. There's no difference between we talk about a seed and a sprout, or we talk about a karma and an action and a result. In either case, if we actually search for the thing we're talking about, it's not findable. But conventionally, it functions, and we can talk about it coherently, and thereby it is reasonable to do so. We'll get into that again a little bit later. Now, this is also from Root Wisdom, from Nagarjuna. He says, it once was here, but now it's gone. This is the view of severance. It means it's a nihilistic view. If we think that something existed at one time and then it ceased to exist, this is a view of severance, meaning that it takes the idea that things come out of nowhere and then they go back into nowhere. That doesn't work philosophically. They're not eternal either. They don't exist forever. But at the same time, to think that there was a real thing that existed from its own side and then stopped existing is the view of severance, is the nihilistic view. Do you all see that? Yeah. Okay, good. That's a little better than before. Oh, in order to get back then. Okay. Yeah, sorry, it's not displaying very well, but I hope you can all see it. Okay, so now we have this is Chandrakirti. A dream still has results. All right, so we think about that. What his description of this: for seeing pretty objects in a dream, on waking, still a fool will feel desire. Like that, not having an inherent being, karma that has stopped still brings results. So Hutch dream has results because we can remember it. So if I dream about something that's attractive to me, when I wake up, I might still feel attracted to that thing. Doesn't matter that it doesn't exist or never existed to begin with. So Chandrakirti says this is similar to the way that karma works. Karma does not have an inherent being. There's nothing there from its own side, but still there is a result of that. So in this verse, he is referencing a sutra quotation that Tsongkhapa then he quotes this in illuminating the intent. So I've just taken Thupten Jinpa's translation here. So this is from the Transference of Existence Sutra. So a man experiences a dream wherein he is making love to a beautiful woman. Were he to continue to think of that beautiful woman, this is the Buddha speaking, we should be clear. The Buddha is speaking to a king here. Were he to continue to think of that beautiful woman after waking from that dream, would he have the character of a wise one? And the king answers, no. So the Buddha says, likewise, childish beings and ordinary people, they cling to forms that inspire pleasure in their mind. They engage in acts with their body, speech, and mind stemming from attachment, from aversion, and from delusion. Having executed the karmic acts, the acts come to cease. Right? The act is finished. When these karmic acts have ceased, they do not reside in the east. And he goes on, they don't reside in the west, the north, the south. Where are they? It's like I asked at the beginning, where is the past? Is it gone? Where did it go? But when the person nears the time of death, like the mind of a person waking up from sleep, turning to the beautiful woman he has dreamed of, the person's mind will turn toward that karma. The instant the first moment of consciousness ceases, the continuity of mind will emerge commensurate with the fruition or result effect that one will come to experience. So the point is, at the moment of death, like remembering a past dream, something comes into our mind, an appearance based upon a past action. So if we've known anything about the 12 links of dependent origination, this is when we talk about the 10th link, the link of existence. So it's a seed has been watered of a past action. So he says, birth is empty of birth, yet one observes that karmic acts do not corrode, meaning that once they are done, they do not just disappear. The effect does not disappear. So the analogy is to a dream, right? That they have a dream and they wake up. It never happened. Is nowhere to be found, but it affects the way that they act now. Likewise, the person, when they are dying, this imprint comes back into their consciousness, and that then impacts the direction that their consciousness goes at the time of death. So Tsongkhapa clarifies that. He says, like the lustful man who after waking instantly thinks of the beautiful woman of his dream and turns his attention to her, the dying person's mind at the point of death turns toward the karma whose potency has been reactivated. Right? The potency meaning in their own continuum, in their own mental continuum, and is therefore likely to mature in the next life. This, however, is not an instance of remembering. It's interesting that he makes that point, but it's very similar. The analogy is to memory, and as I said before at the beginning, that this is relevant in terms of it's just as mysterious how this could function as how memory functions. How is it that a previous action is thereby recalled? So it seems to be that there's a similar function, that the function of karma is not exactly the same as us having a conceptual recollection of something that happened in the past, but the question of how the imprint is carried from the time of the action up until the time it's remembered or up until the karma ripens is a similar question of where did it go in the meantime. So we also see in Shantideva's text, because his wisdom chapter is based upon Nagarjuna's philosophy, he says, there's no one seen that has the cause, and at that moment, the result. Right? So the question is the person who does if a person does an action and then experiences the result of the karma, well, who is that real person? There's no person that has both of them. There's a person that's constantly changing. It's a different person who experiences the result. But based on one continuum, we say he sows and then he reaps. So because there's a continuum of mind, or the continuum of the person, we can speak this way. It's similar in ordinary life. So we have a young child and we have an old man. There's a similar continuum, but they might not even be recognizable if we hold up the pictures next to each other. So the person who does the action, so the child does something that then affects the adult in some way. So, for example, just a very coarse example would be if the child commits a crime that then the person is only arrested many, many years later. He reaps what he sowed, but he's reaping the action of something somebody else did in some regard. But because it's one continuum of mind, of person, then we say that in conventional language. We say he reaped what he sowed. So the point here, how is that relevant, before we go on, is that we talk about, we do an action and then later we experience the result. We don't have to talk about a substantial self or any kind of self that is going through that experience. It's only because conventionally we experience it that way that it's relevant. So if that's the case, then it matters. So although we might not be able to find a real person that is the baby and then later the old man, it's very relevant to us. And everybody in the world would agree that we should arrest somebody who committed a crime in the past, even though it's a different person, because we all agree conventionally it's the same person. And from their side, they would probably also feel the same way, that we are, at least most people are careful about actions they do, about thinking about how it might impact their future. They don't just think, well, it's somebody else that's going to experience it in the future. So in terms of our experience, that's relevant. So likewise, in a future lifetime, even if it's a very different person, to us it matters. If we were to be told, well, in your next life you're going to be born as a cow or some kind of animal, then most of us wouldn't want that. But then I could explain to you, well, it doesn't matter, it's a different person. The cow is not you. For most of us, that wouldn't be enough to comfort us. We'd say, well, I don't want that experience. So in that regard, it's relevant here in terms of our discussion, not just about how things exist from their side, but how we, as experiencers of karma, how we experience the action. So now we get on to disintegratedness as a functioning thing. So we have the contextual background now. So now proof from scripture and reasoning. So this is just to see, how does Tsongkhapa come up with this viewpoint? How does he decide that this is the meaning of what Nagarjuna and Chandakirti were discussing when they don't actually use this explicit language? So first of all, in the sutra, we have from the condition of birth comes aging and death. This is talking about the 12 links of dependent originations. So it says death performs two functions. It destroys the composition, meaning the aggregates of the life, and causes unknowing, meaning the first link, to continue without a break. So we see right here in the sutra, it says that death is a functioning thing. It does two things. Now, somebody might say this is metaphorical, but Chandakirti feels it's important because this is the way we use language. And that's related to how it actually is conventionally. And death, what does death do? Death destroys us. People talk about it this way. They say death comes to everybody and takes away everything that they are attached to. What does that mean? What is the death that is functioning? And causes unknowing to continue without a break, meaning that it impels. Through death, we are wiped free. Our memories are wiped out, and we just continue with ignorance in the next lifetime. Now, somebody might say, well, it's just a convention. What's really happening is that at the time of the body gradually deteriorating, and then there is the process of the brain death and the death of the circulatory system and so forth, and go into all of these details and say that's what's really happening. Death is just a convention that is overlaid on all of that. But in Madhyamaka philosophy, it's no different at all. Okay, so we want to talk about brain death. Well, what do we mean by brain death? And what do we mean by the cells dying? We talk about a cell. And the cell has its own basis of designation. None of those things are themselves cells. And then it's just as much an imputed thing as death is. But if we can talk about death as a functioning thing, and it leads to agreed upon conventions, then conventionally it functions. So then we have root wisdom. Non-things and things are composites. So meaning they're functioning things. They're compositional factors. So Tsongkhapa again understands this as non-thing means the disintegratedness of a thing. So the thing that is the functioning, and after it finishes, then the continuum of it's no longer being there. That's also a compounded thing. And then the 60 stanzas on reasoning by Nagarjuna. Exhaustion of the cause brings peace. This is talking about nirvana. Thus we think exhaustion, but things don't inherently exhaust. How can we say exhaustion here? So if we talk about it as there is a real cause, the continuum of affliction and karma, and when that cause exhausts, then there is peace. But there's no inherent exhaustion. That from its own side, we can't pinpoint exhaustion, that something that exists in a way that is not related to the way that we perceive or the way that we conceptualize it. So how can we ultimately talk about exhaustion? So Tsongkhapa understands this, especially in terms of, we see Chandrakirti's commentary in the next part here is the commentary on this verse of 60 stanzas. Chandrakirti wrote a commentary on that text. So he explains that even in ordinary parlance, we call a lack a cause. So that is important. If we talk about it that way in our ordinary language, then it has some basis for how things function conventionally. So we say, because there was no water, the crops failed. Because there was no food, the boy died. Right? So we would say that. We say, why did he die? Well, he died because the food ran out. Now, again, we could then analyze it. Well, somebody would say, well, no, he really died because there's lack of nourishment in the body that leads to such and such physiological process that thereby that is death. But again, we go into the problem that all of those can be broken down into their constituent parts. They can be analyzed as empty and inherent existence with all the other ways of analyzing these things. So they're no more substantial than just simply saying the food ran out. But where is the food running out? In terms of the state of running out of the food, is that a substantial thing that we can pinpoint anywhere? Well, we can't see it with our eyes, but we talk about it as though it functions. The lack of water was very taxing this year. It created all kinds of problems for us, and then the crops failed. And likewise, in Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, he says, results destroy their causes, thus a non-existent won't arise. So I won't get into that. Actually, we did not discuss that verse that much, but this is one of the verses that Tsongkhapa does cite as a source for his understanding here. But we'll now discuss, so how does he use reasoning to back up what he sees as implicit in these verses? So first of all, the subject disintegratedness is a functioning thing because it arises from causes and because it generates results. Right? So something, for example, so we talk about the disintegratedness of the pot. Why did that happen? There were causes that brought that about. So the pot gradually, it was not well built, and then it gradually fell apart. That's a cause. So the result that comes from that is this disintegratedness. And because it generates results, the disintegratedness has results, right? The pot disintegrated, and therefore I had nowhere to pour water, and therefore I was thirsty. So we'd say, well, why were you thirsty? It all came down to the pot breaking. So conventionally, it generates results. And also because disintegration is an action. So disintegration we talked about before. This is the present tense, and this is something that all the Buddhist schools understand as a functioning thing. Now, for the Vibhashika, they understand disintegration as a substantial thing that is separable from the thing that's being acted on. So the disintegration of the pot is substantially different from the pot, but it's acting to cause the pot to gradually disintegrate. The other schools understand it as substantially one with the pot, but it's the aspect of the pot that is its moment-to-moment change. So that is an action. It's this gradual disintegration. So that action, which is something that occurs over time, there's no way we can pinpoint when it began and when it ended. It's just a continuing process. So at the time of when we say, well, now the pot is smashed, it's no longer there, there's just a continuing process. There's no real place we can pinpoint when was it a pot and when is it no longer a pot. Right? When do we decide, well, now it's broken enough that we can no longer call it a pot? But there's just a continuous stream of unfolding of events. So if disintegration is a functioning thing, then the disintegratedness, it should just be a continuum of that. And because disintegrating comes before having disintegrated, right? So that's what I was talking about just now, that disintegrating gradually turns into disintegrated at the time of when we say the pot is no longer there. And because disintegrating and having disintegrated are equivalent in having a cause or not. So if one has a cause and one is a result, then the other one also has to have a cause and be a result. We can't say that we can't privilege one over the other when they're just, one is the present tense and one is the past tense of the same continuum. And also, finally, because if no cause is necessary for a functioning thing to not abide in the next moment after it is established. So this has to do with, again, the view of the Sautantrika school that then was adopted by the other ones. It is rejecting the Vaibhashika, saying that a pot disintegrating, a pot breaking, it's not something that has to come from an external cause. The external cause is just a condition. From its very moment after it is established, it is already in the process of disintegrating. Some of you might understand this from Buddhist philosophy. So the only cause for it to continue disintegrating moment by moment is whatever cause generated in the first place. So why did the pot break? Well, because it came into existence. That's how that's what happens to everything. So why did this person die? Because they were born. So their parents who caused them to be born also caused their death. There's no way that the person is going to last forever. They come into existence already as something that is in the process of disintegrating. So if that is the case, then it says there ought not to be a cause for it not to be abiding either, in the sense that it's non-abiding is also not something that comes from an external cause. When it ceases to exist, it's just the continuum of that same progression that we label as having started when it was first generated. So these are the reasonings that Tsongkhapa uses to show that just as disintegration is functioning, then disintegratedness itself should also be a functioning thing. And actually, because some of you might be wondering, well, what about the future? It's actually the same. We don't have a word in Tibetan. The word jikpa in Tibetan is the present tense. It's also the future tense. So there's not a separate word for future disintegration. However, as we'll see, both the past and the future are understood as functioning things here. The future is also something that it's in the process of being of coming, and it's not that it's something that is just waiting for us at some place or some time, we could say, however we want to conceptualize it. It's just something that's in the process of unfolding in the present. Okay, so now karmic imprints versus karmic disintegratedness. Now, as I said at the beginning, these are very difficult points to describe, as I think everything so far has been. And I don't have a clear answer that I can just tell you exactly what is the difference, but I'll point out some of the differences in them so we can start to understand what Tsongkhapa is getting at here. So we can think about when we talk about karmic imprints, or sorry, not karmic imprints, karmic cause and effect being traveling through the medium of disintegratedness versus imprints. What is the difference? Is it just not just one word for the same thing, or two different words for the same thing? Okay, so imprints are too unwieldy. So other schools agree that karma cannot remain until it ripens. Indeed, it ceases the very next moment. Right? They all agree on this, that we talked about with the verse from Nagarjuna, that if it just remained until it ripened, then it would be permanent. So they say there must be something, A, there's something that carries its potential in the meantime, and B, that's what they call the imprint, and B, a stable basis on which that something abides. So in the meantime, up until the imprint gives its result, there has to be some kind of basis carrying that, which for the Chittamatra anyway is using them as an example. That's the all-ground consciousness. So Chandrakirti rejects such a position as contrary to the principle of non-self. there's some kind of person, as we see this picture of this man here carrying a boulder, that there's some kind of person traveling through time that's carrying some kind of real thing. Okay, so disintegratedness is not an imprint. The karma ceases, but not inherently so. It does not become completely nothing. So the disintegratedness is not karma. But like karma, it has the potential to give a result. So that is different than the imprint already. It is not carrying the potential of something else. It is virtue or non-virtue. So that is also very different from the imprint. The imprint is neutral. But if I create an action of body, then after that action is gone, right? So I do that action and then I go on to do something else. There is still the disintegratedness of that, which is virtue or non-virtue, depending upon what that action was. The disintegratedness is dynamic, not in a static, dormant state like an imprint. So each moment of disintegratedness impels another. So it's not that disintegratedness just stays there until the action ripens. It has the second moment is going to have the disintegratedness of the action. The third moment will have the disintegratedness of the disintegratedness, and so on. So yes, it becomes infinite in some sense, but conceptually that's also how we have to talk about it, because we talk about the first moment after I did this, and the next moment after that, the next moment after that. So likewise here, there's the disintegratedness of the disintegratedness of the disintegratedness, moment by moment. If we want to talk about it conceptually as a moment-to-moment process. So unlike the other systems, here the result giver stays until the result. Now that's easier to say in Tibetan. The word in Tibetan, jinpa, which means that which gives. It's not, as some of you might know, generosity jinpa. It's actually not the same word. If any of you know Tibetan, it's ao ba yata cha kikuji na jin. So it's the word jong in Tibetan means to arise. It's the active form of that Tibetan word. So jin means to cause to arise. So the thing which causes the arising of the result, it is still there until the result. So the other schools don't accept that. They say that the action is what brings the result, which gives the result, but then the action is gone, and there's just an imprint which carries that potential. But here, that thing which brings the result is still there at the time of the result, as the disintegratedness of a past thing. So disintegratedness itself is past. The past exists in the present as the past. Because the result giver stays, there is no need to posit a separate basis for imprints. Right, so I have these two pictures here. One is the idea that there's something that's about to explode, but it already is potent. Right? It's not just some kind of dormant thing. If we saw a picture of a hand grenade, for example, it would look like something that in and of itself is not actually dynamically changing. But here, this is a Molotov cocktail. It's something that in and of itself, you can see the beginnings of the explosion, which are going to happen, already kind of occurring there. And then we have the picture of waves, which I think is also a good way to understand this, that a wave carries a potential, but in and of itself, it is every step along the way, it is also functioning. The water in this case is moving up and down, or if a sound wave, then it's just one like a spring essentially, that each moment of it is stretching and then hitting the next moment, and then that's like a domino reaction. So it's not that there's just something that just stays there fixed, that there's some kind of, the word in Tibetan would be dok dok, meaning like some kind of just solid thing, like a rock that is just thrown through time. It's each moment then impelling the next moment, and in that way, the result of something, that the energy of something gets carried over a period of time. Okay, so it's not that there are no imprints. This is also important. Again, you won't see this in the texts. They don't explicitly say, or even Tsokapa in his text does not explicitly say that for Prasangika, the karma is not an imprint, but there are other imprints. But it's something, again, that in terms of the way it's debated and the way that it seems to be, if we look at certain wordings of things, it seems to be what they're saying. So Chandrakirti does not reject all imprints. So we have to understand there's different kinds of imprints in Buddhist philosophy. There are, for example, if I do a particular action, most basically, there are the three results of that. There is the ripened result, which is essentially the ripening of the past karma. There is the result in accordance with the cause, which is the impulse to do that same action again. And then there is let's say, environmental result, as the way it's translated anyway in English, which is the result that has on the external environment around me. So here it's really the first and the last one that are being rejected as imprints. They are being carried by imprints. But the impulse to keep doing that action again, that is an imprint here. So we see the potential to repeat the action is left as an imprint. A mind leaves both a seed that can ripen as a similar result in the future. Those are afflictive obscurations. Those are results concordant with the cause. And also an imprint that can ripen as a similar dualistic appearance. So if I have the conception of true existence, that creates the cause for me to thereby think that way in the future. That is an afflictive obscuration. It also creates the cause for things to appear to me as inherently existent. That is the knowledge obscuration. But both of those are carried by imprints. That word is used in at least in Tsongkhapa's presentation, and it's there at least in the auto commentary on Chandrakirti's text. But it seems that there may not be an imprint that carries the potential of karma to give a ripened result. So it's a particular kind of imprint that we're negating here. Now, the reason I have the picture of the baby here is that we see that when a baby is born, this is actually one question that I've heard scientists pose. They talked about this at the Mind Life conference that was at Sarah 10 years ago, that when the baby is born and sees the mother smile, the baby smiles back. How does he know what to do? How does he know that smile is a sign of affection? So that is a problem if we want to talk about the nature of memory, the nature of consciousness, how it relates to the brain and so forth. And it's not something that currently has an answer. The person giving the presentation acknowledged that. But here in Buddhist philosophy, the understanding would be that the baby is carrying imprints from a previous existence, and thereby those imprints are being activated now. So that is an imprint in this system, right? But his taking birth in this particular form, his having this particular mother, the environment around him, that's also the ripening of karma, but that's related to disintegratedness and not related to imprints. Okay, so now defining the past and the future, because we see that it's relevant, disintegratedness being a past thing. Likewise, the past and the future are functioning things. So how do we define them? What do we mean when we say past and future? Okay, so first the definition of the past. This is Jetsun Chökyi Geltsen, the author of our textbooks at Sarah J., giving his definition to make it very precise in relation to the Madhyamaka philosophy. So he says, the factor that is the disintegratedness of another functioning thing after it has been generated. That is the past of that thing. So it is the disintegratedness of that thing. So the definition is a general definition of a past phenomenon and not necessarily applicable to a particular thing. So what do I mean by that? For example, the indirect, meaning the subsequent to subsequent effect of a pot. So if I have a pot, and then I have the result of the pot, and then I have the result of the pot, at the time of the result of the pot, the disintegratedness of the pot exists. But at the time of the result of the pot, it's now the disintegratedness of the disintegratedness, just like it's the result of the result. But it's the past in either case. We don't say the past of the past. We just say it's the past of the pot. So that's why it's not applicable to say that the past of the pot is always the disintegratedness of the pot. The first step, the result of the pot, that exists at the time of the past of the pot and the disintegratedness of the pot. But the result of the result is the disintegratedness of the disintegratedness. It's not the disintegratedness of the pot, but it's still the past of the pot. So you see that the definition actually is not pervasive. It has some flaw, we might say. We don't want to reject our own textbooks at being Sarah J. Monk's, but we could say it's related to a particular thing. So in relation to a particular thing, it's called the past is disintegratedness of something. There's not that. So the past, if something is the past of the pot, it's not necessarily the disintegratedness of the pot, but it is the disintegratedness of something. So we see in the definition of another functioning thing, not necessarily that functioning thing that we're talking about. Okay, so now further distinctions for those of you who want to be very precise in our language or understanding here. The direct result of non-virtue is the past of non-virtue, right? It's the disintegratedness of non-virtue. But it is not non-virtue disintegratedness because, so this is, okay. So sorry, I already misspoke, but we have to see what I mean here. So the past of non-virtue is not non-virtuous. The disintegratedness of non-virtue is non-virtuous because the past of non-virtue is actually a broader category than simply the disintegratedness of non-virtue. So maybe we can see an example here that a sprout is the result of a seed and thereby the past of the seed, but it is not the disintegratedness of the seed. So the result of the seed is also the past of the seed. And the disintegratedness of the seed is also the past of the seed. But the disintegratedness and the result are two different things. And why so? Because the Sautantrikas would disagree. Why is that relevant? It says because all schools agree on the illustrations of disintegratedness, but disagree on whether it is a functioning thing. So in the Sautantrika school, the disintegratedness of a pot and the result of the pot are two different things. The result of the pot is not the disintegratedness. And it's all of the schools agree on what disintegratedness is. They just don't agree on whether it functions or not. So if the Sautantrikas don't feel that the result of the pot is disintegratedness, and the Madhyamakas would also not agree. They don't say, because then also it comes down to disintegratedness being something findable. We'll talk about this in a little later about, well, if we smash a pot, are the shards the disintegratedness? No, they're not. The shards are the result of the pot. Both are the past of the pot, but and so both are disintegratedness of something, but they're not the disintegratedness of the pot necessarily. Okay, and then we have a person's having died is the disintegratedness of the person. I mentioned that point earlier. So also we can talk about it in a more coherent, less abstract way. And then thus the disintegratedness of any particular thing exists after that thing ends its existence and not in the thing's second moment. Right? So when I die, then the disintegratedness of me exists. My death exists. My having died exists. But it doesn't exist every moment. It's not that at my second moment after I'm born, I already had died. We didn't say that. We wouldn't say that conventionally. So likewise, we wouldn't say I've already disintegrated. We only say that after the person dies. So likewise with the pot disintegratedness of the pot only exists after the pot ceases to exist. However, just to make a distinction, the disintegratedness of the first moment of a pot does exist at the second moment of a pot, right? So at the second moment of pot, we don't have the disintegratedness of pot, but we do have the disintegratedness of the first moment of the pot. Again, that's how we talk about it conceptually. Conventionally. So to give, I guess again, a more concrete analogy of myself, I would say I'm not gone. I'm still here, but the child I once was gone, and that has disintegrated. Now there's somebody else in the place. So likewise, every moment of something disintegrates moment by moment, but that thing itself does not disintegrate until it finally ceases its, it stops to be that same thing. Is how we say in Tibetan. We say ngo lokpa, which means it gives up its entity. It's no longer identifiable as the same thing. Okay, so now we're talking about the future. Right, so I said the future is also a functioning thing. So first we have, so the word, it's also important in Tibetan, the word future, mahongpa, it means not come. So that's relevant to how it's talked about here. The word future in English doesn't carry that same connotation. So we'll have to reference it that way. So temporarily not come. So an example of that is in the winter time, the factor of the sprout temporarily being not come due to the conditions not being complete. So we would say that the sprout is coming, it will come, but it's not come yet. So it's not come exists now. The conditions are not complete for it to completely come. So likewise, then we have, or not likewise, actually, a different kind of not come is eternally not come. So this is the factor that is the non-arising of the subsequent similar type of an affliction due to the exhaustion of the continuum of its causes and conditions. So when an arhat, for example, abandons afflictions, the afflictions will not come again. So in English, we wouldn't say that the afflictions are in the future, but in Tibetan, we would say they are mohongpa, they will not come. So it's also a non-coming of something, but it's something that's never going to come. So in both cases, these are functioning things. Now that is a distinction that's only there in the Prasangika. In the other schools, when somebody abandons afflictions, that non-future arising of the afflictions, that is nirvana. But Chandrakirti rejects that based on Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas on reasoning. When he talks about, we conceptualize nirvana as some kind of endpoint, some kind of result of causes. If we have that conception, we're still within the snake of affliction, as he calls it, and we can't be free. We still think of it as something within our ordinary experience of time and cause and effect. So in this school, it's true that the arhat does have that, but that is not nirvana. Nirvana is something else, as we'll see. It's actually emptiness. So then Kejipje says, we assert that very incompleteness of the causes to be the cause for the non-arising of the future not come result. Okay, so what does that mean? To say a little more concretely, again, we see this field in the winter. Say, why is the seed not sprouting? Well, because the causes aren't complete, right? So we speak about it as the non-completion of the causes is the cause of it not sprouting. Now, again, somebody would challenge that and say, well, what we really mean is that it's not sprouting because it's dry and it doesn't have any cause to sprout. But that's not how we conventionally speak about it. And Chandrakirti considers that important. Because conventions are how our cause and effect only exist within the conventional framework. So if conventionally that makes sense and we can agree on that, then conventionally it's true. And thereby the non-completion of the causes is a functioning thing that's causing it not to arise, and that non-arising is also a functioning thing. That's the result of the causes being incomplete. And then finally, the future of a non-existent thing can thereby be a future not come thing. So, meaning that in the present, the future exists as the future, as the not come. The not come of the seed exists in the winter. So like the not come of a future life in the continuum of an arhat. Now here, the arhat will never be born again, but still there is the functioning thing of their not being born again. If the conditions were right, it would come. So it's not coming due to the conditions not being complete is a functioning thing. Okay, so now we have the substantial continuum of disintegratedness. So again, as we'll see, I'm leaving a lot of these points we might feel a little bit dissatisfactory. We get to the end of this, that last point, and it's, well, what are we talking about here? So the reason I'm doing this again is we're going through all of these different ways of trying to get out what do we mean by disintegratedness. And if we understand a little bit about Buddhist philosophy in terms of the other schools, we can see the distinction here within the Prasangika presentation. So likewise, if something is a functioning thing, it should have a continuum. So what is the continuum of disintegratedness? So I talked about this before, the shards of the pot. So after a pot breaks, its substantial continuum continues on the shards. So that we all agree on, all the Buddhist schools agree on that point. But then does the substantial continuum of its disintegratedness also exist on the shards? That might seem to be the simplest answer, to say that, of course, the disintegratedness, because the disintegration of the pot exists on the pot, it's substantially one with the pot, then thereby its disintegratedness should also continue on the shards. But then this is something we debated quite a bit when we got to this point. That's why I'm bringing this up here, because it helps us to see what is unique about this position. But then the problem is, if we say that the disintegratedness is existing on the shards, meaning it's substantially one with the shards, if so, does it exist on all 100 parts? If so, there must be 100 substantially different disintegratednesses, because the parts are substantially different from themselves, from each other. Also, does the last moment of a lamp have no disintegratedness, since it has no substantial continuum? Right? So that's something that in Buddhist philosophy they talk about. The last moment of a butter lamp, when it goes out, there's no continuation of that. It's just the end of the substantial continuum. Now, I don't think the Prasangika would agree with that, but here we're talking about it in terms of how the lower schools understand it. So the Prasangika would say if smoke is its continuum, right? So they would probably say that smoke is the continuum of maybe smoke and heat, both of those. But if we just focus on smoke of the last moment of the butter lamp, and if disintegratedness is one nature with the smoke, then we have to look again how we use language. So this, as the stopping of the lamp is the cause of not seeing, the smoke should also be the cause of not seeing. Because if two things are substantially the same, then the result of one should be the result of the other. But that's not what we talk about. When we say, when the lamp goes out in the middle of the room and I can't see anything, and you ask me, why can't you see? I'll say, because the lamp went out. So the lamp going out is the cause of my not seeing. But it wouldn't make much sense to say I can't see because of the smoke. It's not like the smoke is filling the room and I can't see. It's just that there's a little bit of smoke back where the lamp was. So there are two different conceptual things. The lamp ceasing and the smoke. The smoke is its own continuum, that is the continuum of the lamp. It's different than the continuum of the disintegratedness of the lamp. Okay, so then likewise, if the pot's disintegratedness does not exist on the shards, okay, so then if we take that position, then non-virtuous karma's disintegratedness does not exist on the karmic imprint. So then that becomes problematic, at least we might think. Because then we would say, if I create a karmic action and I experience the result, but the continuum of that disintegratedness, which is going to lead to the result, is not substantially one with my body or my mind, then how is it me that experiences the result and not just somebody else or just something out in space? So we could say, does it not even exist in the continuum of the karmic actor? So Tsongkhapa says, and this is important to understand what he means here, he says it exists on the mere eye, meaning that conventionally it is mine. Just like we could say, well, where is that baby that you once were? And I say, that was me. I point to the picture. I would say it was me. Well, where? If I look in you, I dissect your body, I'm not going to find it. But conventionally, it's me. And conventionally, there is a connection in terms of how we understand things. So thereby, it is mine, even though it can't be located anywhere within what we would maybe point to as the basis of designation of the person. So the mere I, when we say mere I, it's a negation. Mere is a negation. It's negating a substantial self, a findable self. But there's still a self in conventional language. Okay, so now Panchen Sonendrakpa is the author of the Drapo and Loseling textbooks. He says, when light dispels darkness, or when the uninterrupted path abandons afflictions, the continuum is cut and there is no disintegratedness. So that if I do a negative action, there is the disintegratedness, that's a continuum of that. But when that's continuing over many lifetimes, but when I achieve the Arya stage and I experience emptiness directly and I abandon afflictions, then the disintegratedness that cuts. So that if that was the case, that would be pivotal in our understanding of where is this disintegratedness in terms of our understanding of Buddhist philosophy. However, we'll see here there's a difference of opinion, it appears. Because Jetsun Chuki Gelton's student, Jedrung Shedrup Wangpo, I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He was, just a brief aside, he was a, Jedrung means he was at the feet of, he was like an attendant of Jetsun Chuki Gelton. And he wrote a text on Madhyamaka that is understood as essentially filling in the gaps in Jetsun Chuki Gelton's general meaning of Madhyamaka. Which in general, if you've read that text, I think part of it might be in English, it's pretty sparse in terms of explaining the main points of Madhyamaka. There's a lot that needs to be filled in. So Jedrung Shedrup Wangpo, he composed a separate text that's understood as just based on what Jetsun Chuki Gelton said in person, and then putting that into writing for future generations. So anything that's in that text is generally accepted in Sarah J as being authoritative as Jetsun Chuki Gelton's own understanding. So anyway, there he says that the continuum of the disintegratedness of non-virtues continues to exist in the Buddha's continuum. So this is counter Panchen Sonendrakpa, though non-virtue does not. So it's no longer non-virtuous, but that continuum is still there. And non-virtue's disintegratedness does not. So it's the disintegratedness of the disintegratedness of non-virtue. It's not the disintegratedness of non-virtue, but it is still the same substantial continuum. And so the continuum of disintegratedness does not exist on the imprint, because again, we have to separate the imprint of karma, which is something that creates the future action, the future impulse to repeat the action. That is gone when somebody is in Buddha, but the disintegratedness is still there. However, as we see, it is no longer going to create that result because it's no longer non-virtue. So again, we'll see right here that this is our opinion anyway. I would say our opinion in Sarah J. This is the position we take, but it's a debatable point. We try to understand. We try to really then take this philosophical idea and make it more precise within the context of Buddhist philosophy. Okay, so now some more subtle distinctions. Okay, so the disintegratedness of non-virtue is not the substantial continuum of non-virtue. Okay, so that's likewise the pot has its substantial continuum, which is the shards. The disintegratedness is not the substantial continuum of the pot. Likewise, it's not the substantial continuum of non-virtue. Rather, it is the substantial continuum of potential for non-virtue to generate an unpleasant result. So the non-virtuous action has an aspect of itself, which is the potential to generate an unpleasant result. That potential has its own trajectory, which is the disintegratedness. If we said that pot's disintegratedness was the substantial continuum of pot's disintegration, okay, this is going to be very complicated. Again, it's easier in Tibetan because the words are less weighty, but in any case, it's hard to grasp. This explanation I have here is based on again, Namgyal Wanchen. Some of you might know he taught in London for many years. He has a book about Madhyamaka where he brings up this debate point. to try to sharpen our understanding of the disintegratedness. So if we said that the disintegratedness was the substantial continuum of pot's disintegration, right? So pot has the disintegration of pot, which exists along with pot. The problem with that is that the disintegration of the second moment of pot is the substantial continuum of the disintegration of the first moment of pot. So if the disintegratedness of the first moment was also the substantial continuum of the disintegration of the first moment, so we take the disintegration of the first moment, and then in the second moment, it would have two different substantial continuums. It would have the disintegratedness of the first moment, which exists in the second moment of pot, and it would have the disintegration of the second moment of pot, which also exists at the second moment, and then it would split in two. So that wouldn't work conceptually. So then the disintegration of the second moment and the disintegration of the first moment would be indistinguishable. It would be the same thing, but we're talking about two different things here. So Tsongkhapa says that the disintegratedness of karma is a substantial cause of the disintegratedness of that karma. He does not posit the disintegration of the disintegratedness of karma as a substantial cause. So I have this little table here. Unfortunately, I added this later, so I don't think it will be in the translation. But for those of you who are looking in English anyway, it might make it a little more clear rather than using these abstract words. We have moment 0, which is before the pot, right? So we have the clay, which is going to become the pot. At moment 1, that becomes the first moment of pot, the substantial continuum of that. At moment 2, it's the second moment of pot. At moment 3, after the pot breaks, discharge of the pot. That's all one substantial continuum. Now we have the disintegration of the clay. That becomes the disintegration of the first moment of pot, and then the disintegration of the second moment of pot, the disintegration of the shards. And then at moment 0, we have the disintegratedness of the previous moment of clay, right? Because the disintegratedness is always one moment later than the thing that disintegrated. That becomes the disintegratedness of the last moment of clay, which exists at the same time as the first moment of pot. Then we have the disintegratedness of the first moment of pot, which exists at the second moment. And then finally at moment 3, after the pot is broken, we have the disintegratedness of pot. But there's 3 different things that all have their own substantial continuum. Okay, so now searching for a cause. So then what is the cause? What is the cause of the disintegratedness? Is the substantial cause of the disintegratedness of a karmic action? What causes it? So some people say it is, so, okay, just to back up, we had the disintegratedness of pot. I said that the cause of that was the disintegratedness of the last moment of clay. So in terms of a karmic action, karma doesn't come from clay. It's not that you can have something there that you just mold into karma. So what do we pinpoint? So anyway, this is not something for which they necessarily have an answer, but some people anyway debate, say that the substantial cause of the disintegratedness of a karmic action is the disintegratedness of the affliction motivating the action. Likewise, so the clay becomes the pot, the affliction leads to the action. I don't see any problem with that, I say, but as we didn't have that much time to debate this, unfortunately, as we don't have with many things, we go through them one by one. So over time, maybe as we start the Laramba class in the next few years, we'll go over this again, and maybe I'll find that somebody presents a counterpoint to this that becomes problematic. But this is just a hypothetical or a suggested solution. Okay, now again, further distinctions. Maybe there's endless distinctions here, but this is the last part of this section. So Jetsun Choke Gyaltsen maintains that the disintegratedness of a non-virtue that has not given its result is non-virtue. That's different. So a disintegratedness of a virtue that's already given its result, or a non-virtue that's already given its result, is no longer non-virtue. So once the result is given, the continuum disintegrated, the continuum, of disintegratedness is no longer non-virtue. There's still the continuum, but it's no longer non-virtue. So again, his student Jedrum Shedap Wongpo, he adds that the disintegratedness of a non-virtue that has been pacified with an antidote. Similar, that is, in the continuum of an arhat, is also no longer non-virtue. So it didn't give its result, it never gave its result. But it's no longer non-virtue. It's still this tangential continuum, but it's no longer non-virtue. So then this is my debate here. And I ask, can that disintegratedness in the arhat's continuum still give a suffering result? Because the problem is, all of the Buddhist schools also agree that arhats still experience suffering. Now the Mahayana disagrees with the Hinayana schools, the Sautantrika and the Vibhashika. They say that the Buddha does not experience suffering, but they all agree that the arhats do. The Hinayana arhats still experience suffering results until they die. So there's still a result of past karma. So, but if the arhat no longer has non-virtue, which is the disintegratedness that leads to the result, then what brings that suffering result? So say somebody achieves enlightenment in 2025, then in 2030, 5 years later, they experience the result of some past karma. In the meantime, where was it? So if it can still give its result despite the disintegratedness not being non-virtue, then why did we need to posit disintegratedness as non-virtue in the first place? Right? Because Tenzin Chökyi Gyaltsen, he says that disintegratedness is non-virtue because something has to give the suffering result. But if it can give its suffering result without that, then why did it need to be non-virtue in the first place for an ordinary being? I don't have an answer, but that is something I would debate, and maybe someday I'll get an answer on that. Okay, so now an implicative negation. So I said before that disintegratedness is an implicative negation. And Tsongkhapa says it explicitly. He says it is an implicative negation, but he doesn't say what it implies. So then we're left to figure that out for ourselves. Okay, so if disintegratedness is an implicative negation, what does it imply? So in the lower schools, disintegratedness is a non-implicative negation, a non-affirming negation. For them, anything that exists must be findable when searched for among its bases of designation. But if one searches for the positive phenomenon implied by the word disintegratedness, nothing is found. So thereby, it can't imply anything. Otherwise, you have to locate it. But for Chandrakirti, no such pointable thing must be found. So, taking the absence of a previous phenomenon, so this again, to try to break this down, for the other schools, the absence of the previous phenomenon and the disintegratedness, the same thing. They're not two different things. But Tsongkhapa says the absence of a pot, that is a non-implicative negation. That is a permanent thing. But that is the basis of designation upon which we impute disintegratedness. That is an implicative negation. That is a non-associated compositional factor, meaning it's a functioning thing. It's not a permanent thing. So what is negated? It's the thing that has disintegrated. So we say the pot, this disintegratedness of pot, it's a negation because it negates pot. But what is implied by that if we say something is implied? So some people say it implies the cause of disintegration. So I say some people, again, in debate, some people say this, because even Tenzin Chökyi Gyaltsen doesn't posit an answer. So we're left to decide. So some people say it implies that if the pot disintegrated, something must have caused it to disintegrate. But I don't like that personally, I say here, because in that case, the words expressing any action would necessarily imply or express the cause of that action. Right? So if disintegratedness, which is an action, implies the cause of disintegratedness, then if I say this sprouting of the seed, it would somehow imply the cause of that. But there's no reason that it should do that. it's something that it's something that we could then be curious about and search for, but just simply saying it doesn't necessarily imply that in terms of the language. Okay, so now we have, this is another solution. The disintegratedness of pot implies the functioning thing that is left in the wake of disintegration. So that's the past, and then the future, the not come of pot, implies the functioning thing that has the potential to generate a pot, but lacks all the right conditions. So I like this answer here. This is Gawa Genegata. This is the second Dalai Lama. He says, for what it implies, he says, for example, if I tell you that the ripe harvest has been plowed, bales of hay and other things appear to your mind. I think that makes this whole discussion much more concrete. So think about that. When I say, okay, the harvest was plowed, meaning the harvest is no longer there. What do you think about? Then you think about bales of hay, and you think about people selling the hay or whatever. Likewise, if I say this person died, it implies something to your mind. You start thinking about a funeral. You start thinking about a burial. So it implies something else in the wake of what happened. It implies that there's some continuing flow of the continuum of causation. That was just one wheel, a cog in that wheel of causation. So death itself is not just a complete negation of something, it's just a continuation of a series of causes that extends into the future. So then the question comes up, because I ran into this problem when in one of the times I came and had to answer a debate in front of a large group. It was actually at my own house group, my own Kongsan, when I stated that the pot no longer being here, the pot disintegrating is a functioning thing, and talking about this, then somebody asked me, well, is there, he then pointed to the ground in front of me. He says, there's no pot here. Is that not, is there not being a pot here? Is that a functioning thing? Right, so is that a different question? It's not the disintegration of something that was there before. It's just simply the lack of a pot in this place. So, Essence of Eloquence, Tsongkhapa's text, he says, the non-existence of a thing that existed before is disintegratedness. So you see, he doesn't say the non-existent of a thing, a complete non-existence. It's a non-existence of something that previously existed. That is disintegratedness. Okay, so then that would distinguish, okay, so no water is not a functioning thing, but the water running out, they're no longer, the water finishing, that is a functioning thing. However, this is my debate back here. It's a question. Again, I don't have an answer to it, but if we say the food ran out so the boy died is an example of disintegratedness, and thereby we can say, well, the food running out is the cause of death. Why? We could also just easily say there was no food, so the boy died. So it would imply that if the food running out, the food disintegrating, is the cause of death, then why can't the lack of food be the cause of death? So why should the lack of water, just as the running out of water, also not be a functioning thing? In that particular case, when I was answering in the front of the Kongsan, I just gave up my. I said, okay, I made a mistake, and I'll take we say tsar in Tibetan. That way I could move on. I still don't have a good answer, so I'm not sure what I could have said differently. Okay, now here, I just want to show, for those of you who are interested in the in the sort of, say, the relation to science and physics, one of my teachers actually suggested to me to look in this book. He said he'd read this some years ago, and it talks about disintegratedness, which I found it. So this author, Vic Mansfield, he had studied Buddhist philosophy for quite a long time. He was also a physics teacher, and he wrote this book. And then actually he died soon thereafter. He finished the book in 2008, I think, and then he offered it to His Holiness, and then he died. Not immediately on the spot, but quite soon thereafter. So it's interesting to see that you could sort of see that the person, in terms of their own life work, in terms of putting together these ideas over a long period of time. And we could say his heart really went into this. So I looked at this book trying to see if I kind of assumed, looking at this, that I would find that he didn't really understand the concept of disintegratedness, because it's just natural. With generally speaking, people who have a cursory understanding of Buddhist philosophy, they get kind of a general picture of it, but it's not as precise as all the things we've been talking about here, all of the implications of it. However, it does seem to me, actually, if we look at the second passage, that he does seem to have some idea of what they're talking about. This comes out of his discussions with the Gache, so the Gache probably clarified a lot of the potential misconceptions that could come out of this. Now, his discussion here of Hilbert space and the physics concepts, honestly, I'm not an expert on that, so I won't comment on it, but some of you who are interested might want to look more into this. So in terms of the first passage, he says, the middle way states, in the immediate moment after the swatting, he's talking about swatting a fly, the action is in the state of disintegratedness. In the final stage of fly swatting, there is production, abiding, and disintegration, followed in the next moment by disintegratedness of the event. In the next moment, that original disintegratedness disintegrates, giving rise to another disintegratedness, this process which keeps producing new states of disintegratedness, linked to the original action, continues until the appropriate substantial causes incorporating conditions bring about the fruition of my fly-killing karma. Now, he doesn't say anything here about the question of where is it in the meantime. And I don't think I quoted it here, but there was a previous page where it seemed to imply that he was thinking of it as still being on a physical base, which I don't think is the correct understanding of the Madhyamaka. However, the later passage that we see here, you see page 120, it says, it does seem to be that he does make this leap, that it's no longer on a physical base. So I can't talk about all the conceptual things he's using here in physics, but in terms of his talking, the way he's using the language, he says probability amplitudes are not physical waves in three-dimensional space like water waves. They evolve in the infinite dimensional complex Hilbert space. Their causal evolution accounts for the continuity of the quantum system without positing any independently existing material entity. So he's comparing this to this idea of disintegratedness. No inherently existent photon moving through a system apparatus. It therefore bears a striking resemblance to the middle way continuity of causality through disintegratedness. We could accurately say that at each moment of the evolution of the quantum probabilities, they are undergoing production, abiding, and disintegration, which continuously gives rise to another moment of production, abiding, and disintegration, all without any underlying material entity. That's the key point here, where I said that it seems that he did grasp this point, that in Madhyamaka, the disintegratedness, like they said, that it's not existing on the shards of the pot. It's not existing anywhere. We say it's existing in space, but it's not exactly existing in space either. It's simply existing. Now, we talk about the past. Where is it existing? Right? So I did an action, and then I experienced the result. Where is the past existing in the meantime? It's very hard to pinpoint that. Probably we can't. But at the same time, most of us would agree conventionally, does the past exist? Well, yes. We even use that in our language. We say that I'm haunted by the past. Or we say that the past was close behind me. And it means something substantial to us. It affects how we experience the world now. The past has some effect on us. But if we actually try to pinpoint that in space, where do we find it? Okay, so now we talk about death and disintegratedness. It gives us a concrete example. As I said before, the death of the person is the disintegratedness of the person. So Tenzin Chuki Gelsen explains the 12th link this way. The 12th link of the dependent arising, meaning old age and death. So then we talk about death. So if so, the death of the person exists only after the person has ceased to be, which makes sense. In that case, but then the problem here is the 12th link of dependent origination is not included in the same lifetime as the 11th. That is a problem for Buddhist philosophy, because here, if some of you have studied the 12 links of dependent origination, they should unfold in either 2 or 3 lifetimes and not more. And so if the 11th link of birth is in this life and then death is after I die, then they're in two different lifetimes. After I die, I'm already in the bardo. I'm in the next lifetime. So that can't be right if we're trying to understand the 12 links. So anyway, we say, meaning in debate, we came up with this solution. And actually, I say debate. I think also in Jejrung Shedok Wangpo, the text I talked about, I think he also says this. So we say from birth comes aging and death explicitly states that birth caused the link of aging and death, which is not death, it's a link of aging and death. And it implicitly states that birth causes death. So death itself occurs after I die. The link of aging and death, as any of you know, if you study the 12 links, it starts the second moment after birth. It's the link of aging and death is different from death itself. So then it's okay. We can say that death occurs after the person ceases existing. So the 12th link really starts at the second moment after birth and continues until the last moment of dying. It is not actual death. Actual death is after the person is ceased, then we say they have died. Their death made me very sad. Their death had a great impact on such and such thing. So again, we can talk about death as a functioning thing that comes into play after the person has died. Okay, so now further complications. This is, again, I don't have an answer, but we see, if you like to debate, this is a good basis for debate. So if the disintegratedness of the person is equivalent to the death of the person, then it follows that the mother dies at the time of the son, because the time of the son, the mother has disintegrated. So you might respond, reason not established. The mother has not disintegrated at the time of the son. Then it follows that the cause exists at the time of the result, because the mother is the cause, the son is the result. The cause has to disintegrate for the result to arise. If you say, so then we might answer with the sort of subtle distinction that we say, some causes have a continuum. So while some causes cease when the result arises, some don't. Then we say, meaning I would respond in debate, it follows that fire exists at the time of smoke. The reason is parallel, right? Because fire also has a continuum. And we see smoke, we still see the fire when there's smoke. But it's clear in most of the debate texts that we say when smoke arises, fire has ceased. We don't say the fire continues while the smoke is there and it keeps giving results. We say it has to cease for the result to come. So how do we get out of this problem? Okay, now if we say if the person's disintegratedness or death is the person's direct result, it follows that before they die, they generate no direct result, because their direct result only happens after they cease. What about the pot they make? Right, a person makes a pot. And again, you might say, if some result of the person arises, the person needn't cease, only the person's result arises. If we use our very precise with our debate language, then we ask, is a knife a person makes that then kills him both the result and the cause of his disintegration? Again, that doesn't work conceptually. These might seem, and they are in some sense, like word games, but if we're going to use this as a philosophical framework, and even as a framework for understanding reality for ourselves, we have to be very careful the way we say things. Because then if we can't coherently respond to these things, then it's clear that we don't fully understand the concept we're talking about. Now, as I say, I don't have a response, so I guess we could say by implication, I don't fully understand it either, which I fully admit to. But I think if we really want to get to the point of understanding, we have to be able to respond to this and say, well, what is it? What is even this debate about the mother and the son, actually, it's not just a Madhyamaka debate, and it's still something that a lot of people trip up on in debate. Does the mother still exist at the time of the son? Okay, so now disintegratedness versus abandonment. I think this is the last topic. So you all might know, if you studied a little bit about Buddhist philosophy, that we talk about when you meditate on emptiness, you abandon the afflictions. So is that the same as the afflictions disintegrating? So Tsongkhapa says in the Ocean of Reasoning, the text I mentioned at the beginning, his commentary on Nagarjuna, he says the non-arising of a subsequent similar type of afflictions due to the severing of causes and conditions is not nirvana. Right? I talked about that before. The other schools say it is. Right? But Tsongkhapa says that is not nirvana. He says, I have already explained, meaning in his discussion of disintegratedness, that this is the not come that is generated from the exhaustion of previous causes. Thereby, it's a functioning thing. Thereby, it can't be nirvana because nirvana has to be permanent. This is getting at what Nagarjuna was talking about in his text 60 stanzas, when he says that when you think of nirvana as something within the causal chain, you'll never achieve nirvana. It's not within our ordinary experience of space and time, we could say. It's not something that we didn't have and thereby later we get it. If we think that way, we'll never get it. So other schools posit the exhaustion that is the exhaustion of the continuum of afflictions as nirvana. Right? So they say that, as I just said, that this thing that Tsongkhapa is saying is a functioning thing. The other schools say that is nirvana. But in this system, in the Prasangika, that exhaustion is a functioning thing, so it is wrong to call it nirvana. In this system, the exhaustion that is the exhaustion, so I say exhaustion that is the exhaustion, it means what kind of exhaustion are we talking about? And I say this kind of exhaustion. It's again, in Tibetan, it is a little easier to say this. I'm not talking about two different kinds of exhaustion. I'm just saying which exhaustion? Well, this one. It's the exhaustion of inherent existence of afflictions. So Chandrakirti understands when the Buddha says afflictions exhaust, he doesn't mean in a causal process. He means they are primordially exhausted. From beginningless time, afflictions were exhausted of inherent existence, meaning they did not inherently exist. So the exhaustion of the inherent existence of afflictions upon the liberated path is posited as nirvana. So they were already exhausted before you had the liberated path. It just wasn't called nirvana until you had the liberated path. So as a source for this, then Tsongkhapa quotes in Precious Garland, exhaustion and non-birth are one in meaning. So this is Nagarjuna when he is arguing with the people who don't agree with emptiness philosophy. He's saying that if you say
Can
that...
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm Joan.
Oh, hi.
How are you?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Maybe we can do another talk because now here it's 4 o'clock and then we need to prepare for all the pujas and this. So.
Oh, is it the end of the time? I thought we were going for another half an hour. Is that not the case? Do we have 20 minutes left or not?
I thought that normally it's 2 hours.
Oh, is it? I thought, okay, I made a mistake. We only have 5 more slides, but anyway, if you need to stop, then we can stop. And maybe I can just go over them quickly at the next time. I wanted to have time for question and answer, but if you all have to run, then
students also would like to do some questions. So maybe it is better to do another session. We finish the slides and then they can interact with you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't, so do we have time for question and answer now?
No,
or do we have to, you have to run?
Maybe the next session.
Okay, so you want to have a separate session. Maybe we can, if it's possible to arrange that. There's only, as I said, there's only 5 more slides. It would only take me 10 more minutes. But we can also do that together with the question and answer. We could have a shorter session.
Yeah, you can finish the slides and then we can organize another session, just question and answers.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I apologize. I had some technical difficulties today, and then I had been thinking we had until the 20 minutes. So
sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So let's leave it at that for today, and then we'll discuss when we could have a separate session to talk about
this.
You
can continue the slides.
The
slides.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so let me just say before, I hope if y'all have to run, please feel free to go. But just to say, so thank you for having me here. And I know this is extremely complicated. This is very hard to talk about. I'm trying to say it very slowly. Part of it is the language, that in Tibetan, when we just say jikpa, it's a lot easier than to saying disintegratedness. And in general, if we know the debate format, a lot of these things just flow naturally in the way of speaking. However, I'm not sure there's an easier way to say this without sacrificing the detail. And that is the purpose of this talk. I think many of you might be familiar with this concept within having studied Madhyamaka philosophy, but then to get into the implications of it in terms of understanding precisely what it means, I think this is required. But I think it's very good if we have a session for question and answers, so I can see if people are able to keep up with some of these ideas and maybe even challenge some of them. As I said, a lot of this is not complete in my own understanding. And so I welcome anybody who notices points where it doesn't seem to make sense. And if I am unable to respond to that, it implies that I also haven't fully grasped this concept. But as I said at the beginning, this is, for Tsongkhapa, this was one of the fundamental points that he saw as implicit within Nagarjuna and Chantakirti, that he thought it was essential to highlight and then draw out the implications of that for us to really understand how this relates to the understanding of karma, of nirvana, and other essential Buddhist points of Buddhist philosophy. Okay, so I'll leave it at that for today. So thank you all. Okay.
Can you hear me, Venerable?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, I was asked to intervene and say we would love for you to finish the last few slides. We can definitely do it in 2 minutes so that we can complete presentation. So please do continue. It's okay.
Of course, yeah. We'll figure out. We could talk separately about a time, and we can arrange that.
No, we meant now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you don't have to go somewhere else.
We're all here. We're happy to hear the rest.
Okay. Well, I'll go back to it then. Okay. So, so I was talking about exhaustion and unbirth. The point is that Nagarjuna is saying that when the Mahayana, the Prajnaparamita Sutra specifically, when it says things are non-born, as you'll see in the Heart Sutra, for example, no birth, no death, he's saying that, he says exhaustion and unbirth are the same, meaning that in your sutras, we say the Hinayana Sutras, or we could say the Pali Canon, how we want to refer to it, then we talk about exhaustion of afflictions. He says those mean the same thing. So he goes on to say, so thereby be patient, meaning don't be so hasty to reject the Mahayana Sutras. So Tsongkhapa is pointing out that he's showing that exhaustion does not mean exhaustion within a causal framework. He's talking about exhaustion of inherent existence, because he's saying non-birth, meaning the non-inherent existence of birth, it has the same meaning as exhaustion. And likewise, he quotes the 60 Stanzas on Reasoning. If aggregates don't cease, then though afflictions die, you won't transcend, meaning you won't achieve nirvana. However, when they come to cease, at that time liberation comes. So what is he saying? It's understood as long as we grasp at the aggregates as inherently existent, then even if afflictions go away, if we abandon afflictions through meditation, we haven't really abandoned them. And then, however, when they come to cease, at that time liberation comes. When we see the aggregates as inherently existent and non-inherently existent, then we achieve liberation. There's no need to do anything else. So when perfect wisdom looks and sees that ignorance conditions birth, then nothing is objectified as born and having ceased to be. So it's not that we once were in samsara and now we're in nirvana. We recognize that it was there all along. That is in this life passing from all sorrow and all work's been done. Right? All work's been done is the traditional formula in the sutras. When somebody achieves arhatship, they say all the work's been done. He says as soon as you see that, all the work's been done. There's no more work to do. And likewise, Maitreya says in the Sublime Continuum, because extinctions are extinct primordially. So it's the same idea. Okay, so then Asanga says in the Compendium of Abhidharma, this is not a Madhyamaka text, he says, suchness, the path, and afflictions, these three are, respectively, where it ceases. So suchness is where it ceases. The path is what makes it cease. And afflictions are what ceases. So we could say the path causes afflictions to cease in suchness. So Tsongkhapa, regardless of this not being a Madhyamaka text, nevertheless, he quotes this here in the chapter 5 of Illuminating the Intent. He says, now, if it were impossible for the ultimate nature of things to be come free of stains, endeavor would then be pointless. Because if this would be impossible to achieve nirvana. If, on the other hand, it is possible, then this implies that its object of negation does have an existence and is knowable. So he's saying that emptiness has two different objects of negation. This is unique, again, to the Prasangika. The emptiness of the mind of the Arhat is nirvana. That emptiness is both the negation of inherent existence and the negation of the afflictions, which are an existent thing. So it's both as some of you might know if you studied about negations, it's a negation whose negative is a non-existent and an existent. There's two different things it's negating, but they're both the same thing. The Svatantrika, for example, Bhavaviveka, he does not agree with this idea. He believes that they're two different things. You have the emptiness, which negates the inherent existence, and then you have nirvana, which is the extinction of the afflictions. They're two different things. But Tsongkhapa is saying here, these are the same. There's just two different, one thing negates both of them. So the pot having been smashed by the hammer is permanent. But the disintegratedness, that is the non-arising of a subsequent moment of pot, through the force of its causes and conditions exhausting, is a functioning thing. So the disintegratedness is functioning. Similarly, the non-arising of the subsequent moment of afflictions through the force of an antidote is nirvana. That's like the pot having been smashed. But the non-arising of the subsequent moment of afflictions by virtue of the causes and conditions exhausting is not nirvana. That's a functioning thing. It's part of the causal chain. Okay, so now tying this all back to non-inherent existence, right? The original theme. So Kejib J says in Compendium Opening the Eyes of the Fortunate, he says, darkness arises from the candle dying, and the sprout arising from the seed are completely similar in terms of being posited in mere name, right? So although one of them, we might say the sprout arising from the seed is a substantial thing and we could point to it, both of them are ultimately non-findable under analysis. Because the death of the candle does not inherently exist, it can be a functioning thing without being findable under analysis. You say, where is the death of the candle? Well, it has a result. The result is that it's dark. So although we can't point to it in the say we might think we can point to a sprout, nevertheless, it is a functioning thing. In other schools, a functioning thing that needs to be able to appear to mind by its own power, not dependent on the stopping of something else. So the disintegratedness of karma can only appear to mind in dependence upon the appearance to mind of a mere negation of karma. But that mere negation is a mere stopping, so disintegratedness cannot be a functioning thing. Meaning that if something is functioning and it's imputed thing, at the very least has to, for example, a person is an imputed thing for most schools of Buddhist philosophy. But it's imputed upon aggregates which are substantial, and thereby it's okay for it to be a functioning thing. We can't have a functioning thing that is imputed upon a non-functioning thing. Then what we actually search for, there's nothing functioning. So all their schools would not accept that disintegratedness can possibly be functioning. Okay, now finally, your mind makes the connection. This is the important point, I think. It's not explicit, actually. It's my own attempt to understand why does this Kappa think this is so important? So it seems to be that, as I talked about at the beginning, in some sense, the past still exists. It exists as the past. There's a connection. What is that connection? It has to do with mind. So if the creator of karma, the karma, and the experiencer all existed inherently, then the creator and the experiencer would be two findably different things, and that would be the fault. There would be the fault that one person experiences what another created. Chandrakirti rejects this idea. And there would be the need to be an illustration of the person and a basis for karmic storage, all of which Chandrakirti rejects. There is no illustration of the person that is a substantial thing. In this system, the Prasangika system, none of those is necessary. One thing alone, based upon its earlier and later continuum, is past when it's gone, present when it abides, and future when it hasn't yet arrived. So thereby, conventionally, I can safely say, I created it, just as I can say, I remember it. Both are equally self-evident and both are equally mysterious, inasmuch as they're self-evident in terms of how we ordinarily talk. Everybody would agree. But they're equally mysterious that when we actually try and analyze them, we don't find anything. We come into all kinds of conceptual problems when we try to pinpoint exactly what we mean. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. I don't know if it's anticlimactic in as much as I don't know if I resolved all of the doubts, but if people have questions, I suppose that might help to clarify what we're talking about, and I leave that open.
Hello, Venerable Gache. Unfortunately, we are now definitely out of time, and so we would need to save the question and answers. There were definitely people who wanted to talk with you and ask questions.
Okay. So we can arrange that separately if people like. We can discuss that after.
Yes, please. I'm sure Joanne will be in touch with you.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It was very interesting and very helpful.
Okay. Okay. Good. Thank you all. See you again.